proceed to the deliberation portion of the morning session, or of the session. In the way of background for those who joined us late, at the sessions last week, we began to put together individual pieces of the options that we might propose. Those pieces were studied in some depth by the various subpanels that we formed from our committee. Needless to say, when you put those together independently and you have so many different interrelationships, it takes a certain amount of integration. And we appointed an ad hoc set of our membership to do some preparatory work for this morning's meeting and for the meeting, the next meeting, to try to narrow down the possible set of options. And as I mentioned earlier, according to Professor Crowley, we have over 3,000 possible combinations based on the various separate cases we've looked at. And we don't propose to go through them one by one this morning, but we do plan to go through an abbreviated list. There will be other derivatives that we undoubtedly will want to discuss in our report, but we do need to narrow down to a few or a more manageable list, and that's our task before us right now. Ed, you've done the heavy lifting on this, so would you mind perhaps bringing us up to date with the preparatory work that was done?
Sure. Thank you, Norm, and I apologize for coming in a little late. As both the panel and the public can imagine, we're covering ground very fast here. But you can rest assured that I was keeping abreast of it because I was following the Twitter on Astrodude, which has a remarkably comprehensive track of the discussions. One more. So as Norm just said, an ad hoc group, which essentially consists of the 3 or 4 of us who are leaders of the sub-teams, met since our last public meeting in order to do additional fact-finding and prepare options for discussion by the committee today. So the outline of the remarks that I have prepared are first to review and discuss the potential decisions on human exploration. Secondly, to deliberate on these integrated options that we will carry forward and agree as a committee to a process going forward from today until our next public meeting next week. I should just remind you, both in the committee and in the listening public, that we did have an extensive set of discussions last week at our 3 public meetings. On Monday, Sally Ride's group on Shuttle and ISS reported a series of options they brought to the committee for consideration. That was Tuesday. I'm sorry, Tuesday. And it was Houston.
And in what city was that?
On Wednesday, both Bo and Les Lyles presented the deliberations of their subgroups for consideration. And on Thursday, the Beyond Leo group presented its deliberation, and some larger scale recommendations, which were alluded to by several of the speakers, including the high-level assertion that the ultimate goal is to become a spacefaring civilization, and a discussion of why we go to space, and derive from that, as well as pertinent policy documents of the federal government, the valuation criteria that will be applied to these options prior to our presentation to them, to the Executive Office of the President. So in order to sort of frame the space in which we're working, we try to state these as decisions which should be made. I've learned that when you speak with decision makers, they like you to have framed the questions you ask them as decisions. So this represents a compaction and narrowing down of the individual recommendations that were made essentially by the 4 subgroups over the course of last week. And I'll take us through them quickly. But it's important to understand because when you see the integrated options, they are, of course, combinations of these individual decisions. The first is what is the phase-out plan of the shuttle? It is currently a matter of national policy that the shuttle will be retired. And the two principal choices that we laid out here as summary and simplification of the ones that Sally presented last Tuesday in Houston are basically the current policy, which is to fly out the remaining flights safely. We estimate that will probably run into calendar year 11. This is currently policy, but the FY11 funding is not part of the current president's budget. Or alternatively, to extend the shuttle at 1 or 2 flights per year through about 2015, which, as Sally pointed out last week, only makes sense as part of an integrated option, which is combined with extending the ISS, having a shuttle-derived vehicle, a true shuttle-derived vehicle, so that there would be commonality of the infrastructure and a emphasis on a commercial crew delivery capability to replace the shuttle. That's the first decision, two choices. What's the future of the ISS? Pretty simply summarized as end U.S. participation at the end of 2015, what has been the assumption in previous budgets, or to continue U.S. participation through at least 2020, and then there's two slight variants at a sort of nominal capability or at what Sally called an enhanced capability. One decision, two options there. Then we move to the questions of reaching low Earth orbit. These are meant to be ranges so that we can sort of think of different possible vehicles within it. The 25-ton and below is meant to represent the existing EELVs as well as other commercially derived vehicles. The 75-ton range roughly represents directly shuttle-derived side-mount inlined vehicles of that class, and the 125-ton range is meant to represent the Ares 5 or variants of it. The 75-ton class could also include super heavy variants of the ELVs. The next question is, in fact, do we build this launch capability off of the NASA and shuttle heritage, things like the Apollo, the tanks, the solid rocket boosters, which are derived from shuttle hardware, the J2X, that family, which is, of course, the current program of record, or should we consider as a reasonable alternative the EELV defense national security space derived set of launch vehicles? Next decision is how should crew be carried to LEO and to ISS in particular. And really here, at a policy level, there are three choices. One is continue the commitment to a government created and provided service. That's in the current program of record, Ares 1 and Orion. The second alternative is to, at this point, commit solely to commercial and international access. That is to say, to not have NASA develop an independent, federally funded launch system to LEO specifically for the ISS. And the third is sort of an option halfway in between, which is to encourage and rely on commercial and international providers for this humans to LEO service, but to maintain an option, or you can think of it as sort of as insurance or a backup of having an alternative U.S. capability should it turn out that for either international reasons or domestic economic reasons, the commercials or internationals are not able to provide that service in the long run. You can think of this as a real option that it would be exercised within this choice. Next, what should be the plan for in-space depoting and refueling? We have, as a committee, discussed this, and particularly in the Beyond LEO group, quite extensively. We're quite interested in this, either as an enabler or an enhancer of future capabilities. If I were trying to sell this in the Senate this morning, instead of cash for your clunker, I'd call this cash for your rocket. This is creating the opportunity that commercial providers of launch services in addition to a potential market for cargo to the ISS and potentially crew to the ISS, would it additionally be able to provide fuel for purchase by NASA on orbit, turnkey operation, or something like that. The last two decisions, there are 8 in total, that make up this set of decisions that we have to sort through, is what's the first destination for exploration beyond LEO? Should it be moon with surface exploration? Should it be deep space, that is visiting libration points, near-Earth objects and planetary flybys, but with no immediate surface exploration? That is, you would develop in-space capability first and then move to planetary surface exploration. And thirdly, to go Mars first with surface exploration. So moon, Mars, or the deep space option. And finally, what's the role for commercial entities in exploration? To stimulate by choice of the architecture, options which encourage greater commercial involvement by providing on-ramps for example, cargo fuel, crew to LEO, and even beyond LEO systems, for example, like the EADS proposed, or at least the topic which was discussed by the presenter from EADS of having commercially provided modules which might provide both Delta V and cargo capacity beyond LEO, or essentially the current strategy. And Norm, in the process of our deliberation and preparation of the options here, you notice we slimmed it down to 864.
You're doing well.
So all we have to do is get to 3 by next week. That's not a joke.
Ed, can I interrupt just for a
Sure.
second? On number 7, the last, but Mars first with surface exploration, last week you had mentioned possible touch and go on the moon. Does that still part of that? Or is
that's
that
sort of, Leroy, at this level, that's sort of a variant. And in fact, Bob Zubrin discussed another variant, which is sort of a touch and go on an asteroid or a near-Earth object on the way to the moon, way to Mars, I'm sorry. And, you know, amongst friends, I think you can sort of put those in and take them out of the Mars architecture without it being sort of a policy-level decision.
Right, and my cut on that was not so much for going there as much as to test your
That's right.
hardware and
That's right.
operations.
That's right. That these, in all of those cases, and I think Bob would probably say the same thing, is that you really build the hardware to go to Mars, and as some combination of early capability demonstration / test flight, you would do some other things with it. Fair.
Ed, if we're having questions of
Yeah, yeah.
clarification, just
I think
on-
it's probably a good point, Norm, to stop and discuss this much formulation. So,
just on the first question, flying out the shuttle, I had thought there was an option in which there was, in addition to flying out the existing manifest, there would be one more flight taking advantage
Yeah,
of the
and-
existing external tank.
that's well remembered, Professor. And in fact, in the attempt to sort of simplify and slim down, we put that in a note that's associated with basically flying out the remainder. We didn't think that at the sort of policy level, keeping an independent option of one more flight was a big enough difference that we wanted it. So yes, in the fly out the remainder, there's a maybe fly one more flight. For the purposes of the clarification, as Sally pointed out, her subgroup investigated flying a few more shuttle flights, and it turns out that there's a break point at 1, and exactly 1, because there is one more external tank that exists. So without having to restart the external tank assembly line, you could probably fly one more flight, and then there's sort of a big restart cost.
I don't think this is going to grow the space so much as it's something we have to keep in mind when we're looking at these destinations. But these have been made sort of as different as possible from each other so that we can think about them more easily. But then when you get down one layer deeper into it, it really, some of them start to look an awful lot like each other. It's just a question of in which order you do things.
That's right.
So people should not look at this and say, oh, deep space means we're never going to land on the moon. No, it just means that you're going to go other places, and then you develop the lander later.
That's right.
And moon with surface exploration doesn't mean, oh my God, we're never going to do propellant production there. It just means, well, before you get to the point where you're doing propellant production, we're going to land a few times. So just don't get We have to call them something.
That's right. And I think another way to say it, Jeff, we're in complete agreement, is that if you did a 30-year view of how we would explore space, there would not be very much difference at all in these variants. I mean, there's a, you know, there's I was going to say general agreement. There are some reasonable disagreements about whether you should go to the moon on the way to Mars or you should go directly to Mars. I think there's general agreement, and certainly the position of our committee, that we should eventually go to Mars. There are certain capabilities that are required to operate in the Earth-Mars part of the inner solar system, which include launch vehicles to get off the surface, ways to inject large amounts of mass away from the Earth, habitats en route if the voyage is more than 3 or 5 days, ways to descend to planetary surfaces, ways to encounter non-planetary objects, ways to rove around on planetary surfaces, habitats on surfaces. And in really what these distinguish is which are we going to deal off the top of the deck first? And how do we try to do that within the guidance that the President has given us to respect the budget guidance?
Yeah, Ed, it doesn't represent a different option, of course, but I think one of the key things we discussed in our deliberations last week was to make international cooperation, enhance international cooperation, and underlay our foundation to all of these different scenarios. That's a sort of a bottom line recommendation that would apply to any one of the different scenarios we noted here, not just the one that mentions international.
Yeah, and that's actually in a chart a few down less, but it's well taken here. That it is certainly, I would say, characterize it as a strong sentiment of our committee that is the case. And in fact, when we get to the costing proposal, you're going to see a specific manifestation of that we are going to cost two ways so that we can sort of account for the possibility of significant international collaboration and contribution.
Ed? Yeah. On this subject, I'm not sure we have a uniformity of opinions in our committee, but I feel that lunar mission could be another forum for learning how to do international cooperation if we envision that ultimately we will go to Mars as an international venture. Because apart from doing technical things on Moon that will assist you in planning your Martian mission, there is another element that has to do with blending cultures, technical cultures, blending countries that fund things differently, that negotiate between technical people and people who lead their countries differently than we do in America. And I feel like there is an element of going to Moon which involves practicing this international cooperation, because it's a much simpler mission than going to Mars. I would suggest it would be very difficult to get, a dozen countries lined up and executing a Martian mission without practicing that process first by going to the Moon together, which is a much simpler mission and much less costly. So there is another little element that puts a different spin on why should we go to the Moon as an international cooperative effort and not attempted for the first time on this very complex, very expensive mission attempting to go to Mars.
And I would say to not either agree or disagree with you, but to point out that one of the points that Sally made based on interactions with the existing international partners in the space station is that they have much of the same view about one of the important roles of the continued or extended utilization of the space station, that it then becomes more of a proving ground for a more multilateral international approach, which then might continue to the next destination, whichever it is. I don't know, Leroy, if you want to make any comment on that, or maybe Sally might want to from cyberspace there.
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines. Certainly the International Space Station, as we discussed last week, has proved out we've evolved into a very good international framework. And one of the points that we made in Sally's subgroup was that the ISS can and should be used as kind of the training ground to how we would do exploration. But Bo's point is well taken. Going to the Moon is another another jump above what we're doing on ISS currently, and especially in the context of putting international partners in the critical path, you know, right in there in the critical path, possibly departure stages, landers, things like that. And so that would be even a step above what we're doing in ISS now. So Bo's comments are well taken.
And it's worth mentioning, as our European colleagues pointed out today, that the true internationalization of the International Space Station is really just happening in this year. I mean, the arrival of the Japanese and ESA modules, the availability of 6 crew, and so forth is really, it's been an international program on paper for a long time, and it's certainly a lot of hard work and development. But in terms of operations, we've really turned the corner in the last 12 to 18 months.
Ed, if I could add just a comment.
Please.
Yeah, I think, Leroy, thank you for that. And I completely agree with what you and Ed have said. And I'd only note that Bo's point is a good one. And the same could probably be said about the deep space option. That is certainly simpler than initially going straight to Mars. And that there are also a lot of opportunities with that option to incorporate a full international partnership to expand from the ISS and develop that operational capability further.
Thanks, Sally. Okay.
Ed, if I could just make one comment on number 4, just to again clarify some of the discussions that we've been having. It's great that it's framed as a question. In that case, it might be a yes and yes. And so some of the options, in fact, are not mutually exclusive. And if we look at the evaluation criteria, things that we would value in terms of industrial base and workforce and all those things, we'll find that I think there's some intersections there. So, yeah. Again, I would say that, some of the options that we've looked at have benefit to the nation. We talk about, pursuing our leadership in space that suggests that it's not an either or. It may be that there are things that we do on both sides of that.
Yes, excellent point. Many, but not all of these choices are mutually exclusive. But they shouldn't necessarily be taken strictly as such. But of course, as Norm would point out, that would then increase the number of total possible options. If you can say A or B or A and B, like all those tests we hate. Any other comments before we move on to the integrated options? So to warm you up to the way that we're going to present the integrated options, we're going to present on this chart, and I apologize for this being a little eye chart, but I'll try my best to walk you through it. You see down the left-hand column 4 options which are going to be at least considered, if not included in our final report, just for reference. These are not options for considering going forward, but they're sort of a historical perspective of the past and present evolution of the program. So you read across the top, and the first column after the main option column, that is to say the second from the left, is the intent with respect to the budget, which is the current FY10 budget covering the period from 2010 to 2020. The next column is what the decision or recommendation for the shuttle retirement is. The next one is ISF's effective life, that is to say U.S. involvement. The next one is crew to LEO. The next one is heavy lift option. The next one is there a refueling option? Then there's the first beyond LEO destination and the strategy for commercial engagement. And the top line will be a representation by us of the program of record. We think it's important and fair to lay out the program of record as it is NASA's current plan, because of course continuing it would be an option that the national government could exercise. So in terms of these questions, the program of record exceeds significantly the FY10 budget guidance. It retires the shuttle in 10. There is no funding in the budget for ISS life after 15. It has the Ares 1 and the Ares 5 for crew and heavy lift. It does not explicitly consider a refueling option. it goes to a lunar sortie and probably outpost mode, although I must be fair and say that the specific mode of surface exploration has not been decided upon by the program, but an outpost. But I've used it here as sort of a shorthand to represent an outpost, and that there is a COTS cargo component. The next line down does not vary in any way from the program of record, except the committee with support from NASA and the Aerospace Corporation, that is to say PA&E, the independent group working with us from NASA, and the Aerospace Corporation will represent our assessment of how the program of record would likely have played out, just so that the political decision makers will get some sense for our view of the likely evolution of this well-documented program were it to have been allowed to evolve. The program, and that includes, you'll notice, extending the shuttle to 11, which we think is the likely thing to happen. The next line, called increased confidence, is actually an option proposed by the program of the Constellation program, which expresses how they would prefer to deploy additional resources to increase schedule confidence and decrease the risk in their program. And just for historical purposes, we will put on this array the best reconstruction of the original 2005 plan, if nothing else, to point out in the first column, or actually the second column, the budget column, that the program was actually designed to the then budget guidance, which was significantly higher than the current budget, than last year's budget guidance, which is significantly higher than this year's budget guidance. So we want the White House to understand that as they move the target from what NASA was looking at last year to what's in the current guidance, this is the second significant reduction that the program has seen in its budget, and that the program was in fact designed for a significantly larger budget than last year's budget. So a way to show this is to represent something like the original plan, that when the design decisions were made in, let's call it the 2006 timeframe, the budget that the decisions were made to. So for example, as the former Administrator Griffin would remind us, there was little gap in that program. That program had the first IOC of the Ares 1 in 2012, but as a result of various things, including the reduction of budget, that date has now slipped significantly out to later than 2012.
Ed, just as a nit here, how would it be if we put that last one first, so that we can start out with, this is the way the program began, this is where we are today, according to the record, this is where we think we are today.
Right. I think that's probably a good presentation choice.
And then before you move on, a clarifying question. Original 2005 plan, you're referring essentially to ESAS.
Yes, it's the ESAS era plan. And I think we'd actually probably, Jeff, capture the next budget, the budget that had caught up with the ESAS plan or something. We have to do a little bit of work on that, but that's the intent. And of course, we called them in that era the crew launch vehicle and the cargo launch vehicle, which have evolved into what we now call Ares 1 and Ares 5, but not without some substantial changes. Well, the next chart is what General Schwarzkopf would have called the mother of all briefing charts. And it lays out in one chart the about 7, although if you read carefully, you'll notice there are significant variants even within one of these lines. But the about 7 options that our subgroup is proposing that the full committee deliberate on and consider taking forward by a process which I'll describe. Now, in order to sort of try and give you a little bit of a guided tour of this chart before I go into detail, and it's basically the whole rest of the briefing is on this chart, let me show you intent. The top 3 rows, called baseline derived from program of record, ISS focused, and dash out of LEO are the ones where we are trying to be true to the guidance proposed by the White House to us in our statement of task to come back with options that have a credible chance of fitting within the budgetary guidance of the President's budget. We're not sure yet. We haven't sharpened up the pencil and we haven't done the costing exercises. But these three are the ones that we intend to fit within that, within the budget guidance. The four lower ones, starting with used shuttle systems, deep space, lunar, global, and Mars first, are the ones where we have decided that we will not constrain ourselves to the President's budget guidance and see how these come out. The other way to think of this, so let me begin, and I'll just sort of walk you. This is basically the same chart over and over again, but with a different row highlighted, just so you can see the one that I'm talking about. So the first option that we are currently proposing to examine in detail is called the baseline, which is derived from the program of record. It's actually developed by the program of record. And what it would do is basically take the content of the current program and treat schedule as the independent variable and move the milestones to future years, as we say, to the right on the chart, in order to accommodate the budget, recognizing that that increases the cost, ultimately, of reaching any of those milestones. But it does stay within the budgetary caps in any given year. So it's more or less exactly the program of record as described here. That is to say, we give the shuttle the extra year we think it'll take. We withdraw U.S. active participation, federal government participation in the space station in 15. We rely on international partners transitioning to Ares 1 to provide crew to LEO. We develop the Atlas V heavy lifter. There's no refueling option. We go to the moon with sorties and an outpost, and we use COTS cargo, and we see how that plays out within the budget constraints. There are two other strategies at a high level that you could imagine using to try and fit within the constraints. And the thinking here is that it's either or, but not both. Either, as this one suggests, you put your emphasis on developing and continuing to exploit the International Space Station, and do that robustly, and allow the rest of the program to explore beyond LEO, to basically slip even more to the right, even farther out into the future. The other option is to wrap up the U.S. government participation in the space station as quickly as possible and leave low Earth orbit as soon thereafter as the budget allows. That these are sort of the limiting cases. Focus on the ISS or move past the ISS to the stated federal policy of exploring the moon, Mars, and beyond. So the reflection of the current one that's highlighted, ISS focused, is basically we tried to stay within the federal budget as prescribed by the guidance. We retire the shuttle in 11, but we extend the space station until at least 2020. And we bet on all the horses to close the gap from above. That is to say, we have to, in the short term, rely on the international partners, that we develop the Ares 1, because it will have many years to go to the space station, we hope, and that we bet on the commercial providers of launch to LEO. That at the pace that the budget allows, we continue to develop the heavy lift Ares 5 with no refueling and its planned eventual program to go to the moon, and that we not only support a commercial cargo, but a commercial crew capability by providing COTS-like or Space Act-like mechanisms to acquire those services. So this would be robust utilization of the space station, but allowing exploration to move off into the greater distant future. it's a limiting case.
Ed, before you leave that, comment, in the questions you had previously, there were two cases of how active one should be aboard the ISS during this additional 5 years. And it would seem to me that if one does do this, the second option on this page, that one should then make the additional investment to be sure you get something useful out of ISS.
That would be the consistent.
Right.
Right.
And so we could drop that other one and put, in other words, this one is the added additional money.
That's right.
Very
This is
good.
the sort of full-up ISS utilization option.
Right.
That's exactly right. The other bookend is within the prescribed money and trying to fit within the guidance. The other option is put the emphasis on exploration beyond LEO. So the dash out of LEO or explore beyond LEO as fast as possible within the president's budget would retire the shuttle in 11 and terminate U.S. federal commitment to the space station in 15, and therefore it makes no sense to us to do anything other than to rely on the international partners to provide that crew access. And it would use a variant proposed by the program in their briefings to us and that I discussed last week in Cocoa Beach, of actually creating what is referred to as the dual launch Ares 5 strategy, in which there, instead of being a 1.5 launch, an Ares 5 and an Ares 1, that there are two slightly simplified Ares 5s used to launch all the things you need to go to the moon in 2 launches, rather than the so-called 1.5 launch strategy. This would cause the federal government to skip over the Ares 1 development and emphasize as soon as possible, as soon as practical within contractual limitations, the development of the Ares 5. And what it would do is then, in order to save budget and defer the cost of the lunar landing systems and lunar surface systems, it would delay those even further, and it would develop some in-space habitation and propulsive capability, perhaps in coordination with international partners, which would allow us to visit lunar orbit, the Lagrange points, the points of special interest in the edge of the Earth's sphere of influence, near-Earth orbits, and potentially, although even in this option it would be somewhat out, potentially planetary flybys, gaining capability of operating in deep space. But the emphasis here is that that would be done within the president's budget, within the budget guidelines. So those are the 3 options, which are basically, simply put, stretch out the current program to fit the budget, emphasize the use of the space station, but delay even further the exploration beyond LEO, or terminate on the current schedule, that is, say, the schedule that has been assumed in the past, the use of the space station, and put as many resources as possible that the budget allows in going beyond LEO.
And
Norm, you want to, maybe that's a good stopping point if we want to discuss those 3.
I'm happy.
Chris-
Anybody else want to?
Chris had a point.
Okay,
I think
we got a
there are
couple
several.
folks. I saw Chris and then Jeff and then Les.
With respect to what you call dash out of LEO, since that's, you know, you're shedding everything you can to get beyond low Earth orbit as fast as possible, what's an estimated date for when we get a first mission beyond LEO?
Really good question. So maybe this is a good point to sort of answer to answer that by flipping ahead a few charts, because it's probably the question on everyone's mind. And you'll notice that other than the dates which are set by decision, like when you retire the shuttle and when you no longer have federal government involvement in the space station, there are no dates on here. So if we go down about, yeah, I forgot all those were in there. One more. So this is the proposed method of answering that question, Chris, which is that we have now defined by the work of our various subgroups approximately the content of each of these options. We have to do a little bit more detailed definition, but we know about the capabilities, as Jeff just said, about the sequence in which the capabilities come online. And what what we're going to propose, or are proposing as a way forward, is basically these three bullets. First, that we develop a budget and schedule that matches this content and sequence of content and the assumptions and the budgetary assumptions for each of the integrated options in two ways for most of them. One of them is constrained to the FY10 budget guidance with schedule as the free variable. We just say we will follow the president's budget guidance and see where the milestones occur. In other words, Chris, the short answer to your question is I don't know yet, right? Because this analysis is still ahead of us. But the other thing we're going to do is to cost these not constrained by the president's budget for two reasons. One is that in some of them we don't intend to actually try to fit within the president's budget. We intend to see what a robust program would be at a level higher than the guidance in order to potentially make a case for that. But the other is, as was pointed out to us in a recent telecon by the budget folks, is that if you actually expect some commercial or international contribution, what you should really do is price the programs above the budget line and then reason whether the amount above the budget line could legitimately be contributed by other partners. Because if you put it below the budget line, it would have that multiplying effect of moving all the milestones out. So we intend to look at it both ways, constrained by the budget and not constrained by the budget, because it may be that additional international or commercial resources come to play, basically causing some of the cost to be relieved from the federal budget and absorbed by other partners. But I wish I had the real answer to your question.
Jeff?
Got a couple here, and they're all budget related, so they're all things we don't know yet. We've discussed informally that, you know, there's outside the budget and then there's way outside the budget. And, you know, I think there's a lot of interesting options that are maybe beyond the current budget, but not by an amount that might be out of reach. And it's hard to tell from this kind of what your subgroup's intent is going forward.
I'll defer to our chairman.
Well, my reaction is there's no sense proposing things that are dead on arrival. And if there are plausible, doable, useful programs that are in your first category, we ought to do it. If there aren't, then we're in the second category.
Okay. Now, that was not actually my original question. I'll be quick.
Or said another way, you know, I think that by doing these and the variants that are represented, we will get a little bit of a value curve. We'll get a cost and benefit, a sense of the cost and the benefit of additional investment by the government, and we'll have some sense of that trade.
The point I wanted to raise that's deeper than that is that chart makes an assertion, and the assertion is that none of the next 5 options are within or close to the budget. And I don't think that's correct. I think there are variants of some of those that are within a reachable distance of the budget guidance.
That's a fair comment. That when I flip back, I'll point that the greater than might actually be greater than or about equal to. Right.
Let's see, less next and then both.
Yeah, just for completeness, and because we've discussed this, obviously, and I know you're going to talk about it in the next chart, can I suggest one mod to your matrix here? It's an excellent one. But after the commercial engagement column, we have a column that says international participation. We put importance to that. I have a feeling this charter is going to have life of its own in the future, and because it is something that we think is a valued, very, very valued consideration, that we capture that.
Yeah, an excellent point, and we were just trying to, I think we all understand the importance of that, and we were sort of thinking of that as a wrapper. And there is a subtlety, which is that at least in principle, the choices that are made in corresponding to these decisions are under the control of the federal government. when we retire things, how much we fund things, which capabilities we build first. And there's a subtle but important distinction of not wanting to sound too prescriptive about the role of internationals in these various ventures. So that's the balance we were trying to strike.
From a policy standpoint, this is also somewhat in control of the federal government also. That's
Well,
what we
the
don't want to
policy about engaging internationals, absolutely. Yeah, right.
Bo,
Yeah. In this upcoming costing exercise, and I made a point of it previously in Huntsville, and I'd like to make it here again, it's absolutely essential that we make sure that whenever we recommend, or not recommend, but lay out a program that is going to replace, by someone's choice, probably salary grade higher than ours, to make a choice over the program of record that we clearly account for all the costs that are associated with the changeover. And some of them are not easy to see. Some of them, what I'm trying to avoid is a bunch of hidden gotchas that NASA is going to be struggling later after somebody sort of took a, friendly view of a paper program, and we didn't account for all the cost items that really will result from changes. Changes, changes some people love, some people hate, they always happen, and they bring along with them surprises. And it's our job, as well as we can. We had a little time to do it. We had help from our aerospace friends and consultants. And I think it's very important that we don't send the country on some chase of things that has a bunch of what I call affectionately hidden gotchas. It's very important, and
I think in our public meetings in particular, on our tour last week, some might call it a road trip, that we heard many pleas from both the management and workforce for continuity that we would have to consider. In specific response, Bo, to your comment, the excellent report by the Aerospace Corporation on the relative assessment of the EELV as a crew launch capability, which I believe was issued as a public document this week, when they costed out the transition costs there, they actually identified a set of things that could happen within 6 months of a decision, a set of things that could identify what could happen within 12 months, and a set of things that it would take 18 months within such a decision to occur, based on experience in historical records, historical evidence of previous major contract transitions that have occurred. And you're absolutely right, we have to factor that in. And I think with the help of aerospace in this process going forward, we'll make sure that's represented.
it's my turn here. Sally pointed out to us that the program of record does not include money to deorbit the ISS, and at least for the 2015, we ought to make a mental note to include that.
That's an excellent point. I think she pointed out that it doesn't include enough money to your ISS, but
That may be.
Yeah, I can actually clarify that because we've gotten, yesterday afternoon, late-breaking news, we got an independent assessment from Aerospace, and they identified some significant costs that are not presently included in the budget that would be required if ISS were to be deorbited. And we'll make those available. I think we just spread those around last night, distributed them last night, and that will definitely be part of the costing for those initiatives.
And I guess that should be included in both 2015 and the 2020 case.
right. One of the benefits of looking at the 2010 to 2020 window is it moves that out, which is, of course, a false economy. But other questions on the first three? If not, I'll go back to let's go spool up about 6 slides. One more. Oh, that's the right one. Another option, which starts, the thread for this one starts with an observation that Sally's group made, which is that it may make sense to, if you were to decide that an appropriate way to do heavy lift was some vehicle directly derived from the shuttle, or one might say more directly derived than the Ares 5. And I've called that a class here under the heavy lift category, directly shuttle derived, and that's a placeholder for side mount and inline options and things that use SSMEs and so forth. That if you were to choose that, then it would make sense to consider extending the life of the shuttle beyond 11 by a few years. We've used as a placeholder here 2015, so that you could both close the gap and reach synergies between the operation of the eventual heavy lifter and the operation of the shuttle. So this is one in which, and here I'll take Jeff's friendly amendment, this could be greater than or roughly equal to the president's budget. We haven't done the costing yet, but we would allow it to drift more than the president's budget if it called for that. And then the crew to LEO would be provided in the interim, and this presumably would be a relatively low rate. I think Sally's report said 1 to 2 launches a year. And I think, as I recall, Leroy, discussions with the shuttle operations people felt that they were comfortable from a safety perspective going that low.
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
Yeah, so we've done that diligence. So that you would then use some combination of the shuttles and the IPs, the international partners, to reach the space station, and then eventually commercial providers of human launch to LEO, crew to LEO would come on. That this would only make sense if you did it in conjunction with a directly shuttle-derived vehicle, which really would only make sense also if you developed the capability to enhance the upper stage of a directly shuttle-derived vehicle with some sort of fuel transfer, tanker or depoting idea, so that, as Jeff discussed in his discussion of depoting it was a Freudian slip, last week, that the important parameter for the design of missions beyond LEO is how much mass can be injected away from the Earth, not the size of the Earth departure stage, if you allow there to be refueling of the Earth departure stage on orbit. So there's actually many things that have to work together in order to make this option make sense. But if you made all these choices, then this integrated option does fit together and will be one that we recommend evaluating. The next one is, in fact, sort of an elaborated version of the dash out of LEO. It's one where you allow the shuttle to fly to 11 and, not or, and operate the space station until 20. And in that time, you would first use all the words aren't here, you would first use the international partners' Earth to LEO crew transfer capability, and then you would strongly encourage a development of domestic commercial capability, which is over in the last column. And for these two, we've kept the idea that while the committee is strongly in favor of encouraging the development of domestic U.S. commercial crew capability to low Earth orbit, it's one more step to say, and we're ready to commit the nation to it. In view of all of the uncertainties that occur in the business community about the delivery of services which are funded by the companies and by investors, that we think that it's prudent in at least some of these options which rely on a commercial crew to bookkeep another option, the idea that there's some insurance that somehow in the U.S. launch capability there should be the ability to quickly reconstruct, if you will, the capability to launch U.S. crew to orbit on a U.S. launcher. So this is sort of rely on the commercials but have a little insurance policy as a strategy. Likewise, in this one, we could imagine, and we are still considering both NASA heritage, and that would include things like Ares 5, of course, but it might also widen that space up a little bit. NASA heritage, heavy launch vehicles, or what in the EELV family would be called super heavies, things like the Atlas V Phase 2 Heavy, which is a roughly 75 ton to low Earth orbit capability. And consistent with the deep space destination, it would go to lunar orbit, the Lagrange points, to near Earth objects, the asteroids which cross Earth, and conceivably within the foreseeable future to planetary flybys, and we would encourage commercial cargo and crew supply. The next one is lunar global. This is not too far from the current strategy for exploring the moon, but one that allows the budget to be relaxed. Again, 11 for the shuttle retirement and 20 for the space station termination or withdrawal. Same strategy for crew to low Earth orbit, same strategy for heavy lift, and the difference is really in the destination. And that you would go to the moon on a sortie and extended sortie stay, much like the mode in which you would first explore the surface of Mars. At least the reference missions, including Bob Zubrin's reference mission and the NASA reference missions, do not call for initially developing a base-like or outpost-like capability on Mars. It's more of a self-contained lander that arrives and goes to different sites on different opportunities and allows broader exploration of the planetary surface. So this is our moon variant, lunar variant, which more explicitly, both in the technology and in the subsystems and system concepts, would prepare us to take the next step to Mars, having spent some time on the moon. And the last one is actually very close to, conceptually, to both the one that Bob Zubrin presented this morning and to the the NASA Mars Design Reference Architecture 5.0, which is an option in which we do, in fact, go directly to Mars with the friendly amendment of maybe you take the Mars hardware and go to a near-Earth object or do a test flight to the moon, but only for the purposes of validating and demonstrating the Mars hardware. So we would, in that, almost certainly need to extend the ISS using IPs and then commercials. And here we take all of the budget for all practical purposes other than some stimulation of the commercial launch to LEO business and the money to extend the ISS, and we put it on building systems for Mars, and we build them as quickly as possible in order to reach Mars as the next destination. So Norm, that's still many, but many fewer than 834 or whatever the number is. And I did try and get through it in a timely way.
You did a terrific job. Sounded like the same sessions I was in fact. I'm happy. Are there questions, comments, concerns?
Norm, I have a comment, if I
Well,
may. You know, this is a pretty small subset of what we looked at, and I want you to know it wasn't easy to come up with a set. It was not easy. In fact, as we went through the process of trying to figure out what makes sense using our judgment, experience, and also the input from aerospace guys, I personally became more appreciative of the wisdom of the original Ares 1, Ares 5 configuration. And I think given enough money, these guys could have finished this job and served this nation well. But they don't have enough money. Their budget has been cut over the years, and I've seen some data recently that is sort of shows just by how much. So I'm telling you, this is not these alternatives, another reflection on the guys who created the original architecture and were trying to serve our country via that architecture.
Probably also should footnote that we discussed still adding some boxes or something where there are interesting derivatives not worthy of this list, but that should be called to people's attention. Chris, did you have something you wanted to add?
I have a question regarding the U shuttle system scenario. The first beyond LEO destination is listed as Lunar Sortie Outpost. Could you just say a bit about why going to the shuttle derived vehicle would drive you to that being the first destination? Why couldn't one have a more deep space type set of options there?
Ed, could I make a comment also?
Sure.
Chris, I actually think that's a really good question and a really good point. And I would suspect that after we've done the costing of these and seen what happens with budget and schedule, that we may discover, and we just haven't had time to discover this yet, that in putting together some of these options, we may have combined things like the close the gap with perhaps not the best exploration alternative. And I'm not in a position to say right now whether we have. Ed certainly has a better perspective on the beyond LEO destinations, but I've had the same observation actually in a couple of them, that as we get smarter over the next day or two or three or four, it may become obvious that a little bit of mix and match produces better integrated scenarios. But this struck me as a very good place to start, since we have to start somewhere with a finite set of options that need to be costed.
I would take both of those as friendly amendments. I think that the committee should reserve the right to sort of spin these tumblers several different ways as we work our way through it in the next week or two.
Jeff?
On the deep space and the lunar global lines, again, trying really hard to find some way to get these sort of kind of vaguely like the budget. I want to talk a little more about what we have in mind, or what I want us to have something in mind about what is this U.S. backup to international partners and commercial crew to LEO strategy. And in particular, I see a big bifurcation in that there's a set of more expensive options where what you're talking about is coming up with a crew-compliant booster that's big enough to loft your exploration capsule to ISS. And there's another much less expensive sort of options where what you do is you still let the commercials develop sort of a crew taxi with maybe enhanced U.S. government support, and the U.S. government provides a backup booster in case their boosters don't go. And I'm not sure if this is both of those or which of those.
I think it's all of those.
Okay.
In fact, I think there's three classes of things. You mentioned two of them. You mentioned the U.S. government providing a more robust option by providing a launch vehicle, under the argument that it might be easier for the commercials to develop a capsule than within a fixed amount of time. It might be easier for the commercials to produce a reliable capsule than a launch vehicle with the demonstrated reliability that you would expect it to have before you put a human on board. So that's the robustify the commercial launch capability. The second class of options you also mentioned, which are whichever route that you go through for the heavy, you could have a variant of the heavy that was light, right? So if you did the Ares 5 as the heavy, there are variants of the Ares 5 that could carry crew to low Earth orbit. If you did a Delta 5 Phase 2 heavy, you could use the Delta 2 Phase 5 medium as the backup plan for crew to orbit. So there's a class where you make simplifications of the variant of the heavy, and then the third class is if, for example, you choose to skip over the Ares 1 and go directly to the Ares 5, that you would keep alive enough capability of in the Ares 1 because of the commonality between the 1 and the 5, so that in a relatively short order you could go back and finish the 1. So there are several different ways to, depending on exactly the launch vehicles that get picked, to think about how you would do that.
In that case, I'll just note this is a deceptively simple chart, because there's really a lot more options on here than it looks like.
Are there any, Bo?
Hey, one thing, I sort of react a little bit like my younger colleague here on this U.S. backup. It sort of implies that we don't think that the guy working in a private industry is as reliable or as conscientious to design a system that will launch people to space. I don't agree with this, by the way. But I think it's very important that when NASA competes for these commercial capabilities, that they structure their procurement in such a way that our best and most reliable contractors bid on it, and NASA selects not only the newcomers. I think it's very important to stimulate commercial industry, open the door so that so the newcomers can come and play in this game. But it's also important, especially when it comes to launching humans to space, that the companies with the best skills and the best capabilities are also allowed to bid, and NASA select at least one of them. And I think that's how you assure that we have a safe access to station and LEO, and without necessarily having a U.S. government backup.
Well, if I can respond to that, and this will demonstrate to the public that we really are deliberating, I don't agree with you. But I actually don't agree with you on a different part of the argument, Bo. I don't have any doubt that the commercial community could provide these capabilities technically, right? But the first word in commercial launch is commercial. And as somebody who sits on boards of both private companies and public companies and has some insight into the fiduciary responsibility of board members, I know that every quarter and certainly every year, boards of directors are legally obliged to make decisions about the investments of corporate assets to optimize the internal rate of return for the shareholders. And unless the federal government structures the commercial acquisition in such a way so that there are reasonable assurances that there, in fact, will be markets for these things, and there will be, essentially, there will be a market, then it introduces a great deal of risk into those business decisions, which is my concern, not the technical capabilities of the organizations to deliver. And there are, we know, various mechanisms under the Space Act and mechanisms used by other government agencies in times of when it is expeditious on behalf of the nation to not directly apply the federal acquisition regulations. Les would know much more about this, that there are other mechanisms by which assurances can be given to corporations to provide services on their investment. And you might want to comment on that, Les.
No, you hit it right on the head. I think that's exactly the other consideration that goes into that process.
All I want to add to that is, at a time when we're trying to present national policymakers with ways to do more with less, we can present them with recommendations to put those tools in the toolbox. And, commercial is a shorthand. It's not just about who you buy from. It's probably much more importantly with how you buy. You can buy commercial things from quite large companies, but you have to do it that way.
And I think what this flags up, Norm, is that in this discussion of commercial, there's actually quite a bit to be said about business practice by the government and how these acquisitions are structured.
Let's see, as a peacekeeper here, let me propose a solution, and that would be that we have a separate box that we take out of these boxes, either the U.S. backup or the commercial, and in a separate box, say, if you want to do it, I don't know which you make the baseline, but let's say you make the baseline having the backup. Another box would say, if you don't want the backup, you could save X dollars, but take risk for it.
Okay. I think that was intended to be in there, Norm, and it's just in the way it came out of the presentation.
I think that solves Jeff's concern.
Okay. There's one specific axis where that doesn't do it, and where we can't, I don't think, box the problem. And that specific axis is the choice of a NASA heritage or a more, commercial DoD heritage set of vehicles going forward. And the reason is that ripples through so many other aspects of the program that even though the capabilities might be similar, the stakeholders are all different, the budgets are all different, the workforce implications are all different, and I don't think that we can treat that as a box. I think those are actually distinguishable options for that reason.
Well, if that's true, then you've got on this page about 11 options.
Well, it's not a perfect world, but
It's not a perfect world, but if you take 11 options to a senior decision maker in this country, you're liable to get any answer, I'm afraid.
well, I appreciate that. Maybe we can find some other ones to prune, but
So, Norm, there's just a few charts at the end here that I want to end with and get off the stage. I just wanted to remind us, this was less the note about international. There's an ongoing discussion about international, the role of robotics, technology development, and the role of NASA and its institutions that will, of course, be reflected in the report as well. But we're not explicitly, at least yet, embedded in the option choices. And we discussed many of these last week, and they reflect our statement of task from OSTP. So on the next chart, I think we've done this. We basically argued about whether it reasonably captures the report of the subgroups. Are they reasonable and consistent? Are they? Is there any evidence, new evidence that would cause us to add some? Are there any options that could be deleted? I'm afraid we didn't get very far towards the deleted end of the spectrum.
Well, let's, what I would suggest we do is go ahead and cost these out, determine the schedules, when you get where, and see if there's a simpler version that we can come up with how to present the results. I think all the options are very justifiable. It's just that I worry about trying to explain this. And so maybe there is a simpler way to show it. And if when we go through it, there's some options we can put aside or deal with in a box or something, that's great.
So if we go to the last chart, that's the plan, which is that we, as I alluded to earlier, we'll cost these out with and without the constraint of the guidance budget guidance. And that we will also evaluate them based on the valuation criteria, which we presented to and was approved by the committee at the meeting last Thursday, so that we understand that we're looking at these in terms of exploration, preparation, science, et cetera, and that we present these results next week for the deliberation of the committee.
Well, I think you've done a terrific job, but if we could come back next week with less than 834, that would be very good. Does anybody want to have a last word? Jeff wants to have a last word.
well, we may not be the last. I'm sorry, but we're not out of time yet. I think there may be a pruning option. You'll like deletion. I'm not sure that at the level of national policymaker decisions, dash out of LEO and the deep space option are so distinguishable that we have to track them separately. I mean, the only real difference between the two, considering that NASA Heritage is already, contains, depending on how much budget you want to spend, Ares 5 as a subset, the only real difference is, do we or don't we extend the space station? And I'm not sure, given our limited trade space, that we want to have another one of our primary options that doesn't extend the space station. And if we didn't have that, we could drop one option.
Well,
The difference
yeah.
is this, the budget, the dash out of LEO is in the budget.
Well,
space,
but
so-
again, some of the, as discussed earlier, some of the variants of the deep space option that are maybe stretched out more schedule or use less expensive launchers do become budget compliant or close to it. I'm trying here.
yeah, you're right. The difference between the budgets available for exploration beyond LEO and those two options is on the range of $12 to $15 billion in the window, which out of a budget that would go to Constellation of about 70 is not a small change, but it may not be larger change than some of the other changes that are embedded. I get you. Maybe we'll think about that.
Chris.
So I'd like to float just one other topic here that we're not going to resolve today, but I think it ought to be on the table. This chart's titled Integrated Options for Consideration Going Forward. And if we think about the way it cuts through the Constellation program, it reconsiders the various options. Reconsider how we're going to get to low Earth orbit. Is it Ares 1 or not? We reconsider heavy lift. Is it Ares 5 or not, with various options. Because we're considering destinations, we reconsider whether we're going to have the Altair lander or not, or at least whether we're going to have it sooner or later, or something else, presumably. What isn't explicit on this table, and what one of our public speakers emphasized today, is, well, what about the crew vehicle? There is, of course, if one goes with some of the commercial options for crew to low Earth orbit, one would have a different crew vehicle. But I don't see a kind of systematic discussion here of what, if anything, our thoughts are about the crew vehicle, and probably we need to formally discuss that at some point.
I think that's a really good point. One of our earlier versions had a column for the crew vehicle that at least addressed whether it was a 2 or a 4-person crew. That we probably ought to add a column back in for that as we do our work. Wanda?
I had a comment I wanted to make, again, generic, as we start to think about the report and how we formulate that. I think we heard, from many different cities that we've been in recently, the need to make sure that what we take forward, really is executable and doesn't have these little hidden surprises in them. So I think it's important that we capture our assumptions on some of these in the report in terms of what our intent was. Because as I look at, for example, the ISS-focused full-up ISS utilization, I'm not sure that I would be able to really say what we're assuming there in terms of the number of astronauts that we're thinking we would be able to transport in order to support that full utilization, in order to say that we really were getting a tremendous value out of that. And there, I think, are a couple of others here where, as I listen to all of us, we have different ideas about what's built into it. So I think it's really key that whatever options we come forward with, we somehow are able to communicate what the assumptions were behind it, and maybe why we thought it was important.
Good point.
At the risk
Norm,
of extending this.
I don't think I was advocating that we add another column to the table. I think I think that would be the wrong way to go. I just wanted to float the fact that we haven't, I think, as a committee, deliberated on this question in any detail of the crew vehicle.
Well, maybe we should take a couple of minutes.
Jeff, I think you have something to say.
Well, I'm here's another Nixon goes to China moment. I've been as strong a critic of the size, particularly the size of the exploration vehicle that we're engaged in developing right now as anybody has. Were we possessed of a time machine, that would be one of many things we would like to reopen, but we're not. And so I simply can't see reopening major changes to the exploration capsule from an engineering and sort of project management perspective unless we look at options in which initial operating capability of the capsule starts getting out into the 2020 plus time frame, because it's going to take that long. If we really crater that program and start over, it's going to take that long, and if we try to do minor course corrections, it's going to take half that long for almost no benefit. So I just, much though I wish we were in a different universe, I would recommend that we not add that dimension to the trade space.
Were you thinking of a crew vehicle of less than 4?
I've thought of a lot of things, but they all look so different than what we have under development right now that the programmatic implications of trying to go there would not, in my opinion, lead us to a place that we would like.
The reason I asked that is apparently in reality we have a crew of 4 vehicle today, whether we like it or not.
Yes.
And to go much less than 4, I wonder if you start getting into workloads and psychological issues that get pretty tough.
Let me just say, if we had designed the system from the beginning for a maximum capability of 4, it would probably look quite different than it does right now.
Yeah, I don't know that, but it could be.
No, I think that I think Chris was right in raising this point, but my sense is that the reason it hasn't made it on the trade matrix explicitly is that there's a general consensus that's developed among the group that more or less Jeff just articulated, and that we should just make that explicit. You know, that at this point in that program, barring some overwhelming reason to change it, it's at a programmatic point where it's unlikely that any small change or large change will do anything other than delay it extremely. And I think we heard from both the commercial provider and the program manager of it to that effect.
Any other points?
I have one sort of closing thought, Norm. Our first international speaker, Jean-Yves Le Gall, started by addressing us as a commission, and in his excellent but French accented English, I wasn't quite sure whether he said the August Commission or the Augustine Commission. So I would comment that we're certainly the Augustine Committee. I hope someday we'll be referred to as the August Committee, but we're certainly the August Committee.
I think we're
and we have to work to get this stuff closed out by the end of the month.
we're the Committee on the Future of Human Spaceflight in the U.S. Anybody else? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Well, if that's a,
That's the criteria, both sides on
you
the
know,
same.
if I may, Norm,
The audience is starving, you know, Bo.
okay.
Go ahead.
I'll do it.
Go ahead.
Just final thought, you know, I hear it like once a week. Flying to space is hard. Well, flying to Leo is a little easier. Flying to Moon is going to be harder. Flying to Mars is going to be much harder. I mean, this is like a various level. NASA is good that we have handled this flying to Leo for a long time, you know, and we are, and you know, Mr. Zubrin said we are stuck at Leo. Well, you know, that's one way to look at it. And I feel like, you know, NASA has brilliant people. Get attention of these brilliant people on the harder tasks and think of buying the easiest task from industry. And I think if NASA does that, I think it would elevate, it would strengthen NASA. NASA would show off their skills in doing the hard stuff. And by the, you know, it's not simple, it's still hard. Going to Leo, I mean, God, I've been in this business for a long time. It's still hard. It's a little bit easier than going to Moon and Mars. So, and I think NASA, if they works on these hard tasks and introduce vigor into commercial industry, I think that process would elevate NASA in stature in America.
I'll add a thought to that sort of vein, and that is I've refrained from referring at all to the study that was done 19 years ago, believe it or not, after the Challenger accident. But one of the things that was recommended there was to get on with building a heavy lift launch vehicle, because that's kind of the ground floor to everything. And I think one of the lessons that most of us have learned in our career is don't skimp on the heavy lift part of it. Let's have enough lift so we can have margins. And I think as we go through our recommendations here, that's one of the things that we want to have in mind. Now, if I haven't opened Pandora's box, anything else? Anybody? Okay. Let me just say that we have our work cut out for us. We will meet again next week. We have 26 days remaining before our deadline. Thank all of you. Thank our speakers, our public participants, and have a nice day.